So welcome everyone. My name is Ofer Shezaf. I'm a principal product manager with the Microsoft Sentinel and XDR teams here at Microsoft. I'm a SIEM guy. I joined Microsoft 6 years ago to create Microsoft Sentinel. It's been a journey. I came from ArcSight, where I did SIEM for 15 years. When I joined Microsoft, Eliav Levy was my manager, told me, I know you know SIEM, that's why you're here. Go learn cloud. He was very, very right. And my journey learning what cloud brings to a SIEM and Sentinel in particular is the base of what we'll talk about today. And I also think it's part of what makes Sentinel successful. So without further ado, let's move on. What will we talk about today? Heads up, this is not a lightweight presentation. We'll learn some deep concepts today. We'll apply them to SIEM, and we'll learn how the Sentinel Repositories feature helps you implement those deep concepts more easily. We'll start with understanding what is a cloud-native SIEM and what does it mean having a SIEM in the cloud, as a matter, not just for the cloud, but in the cloud. We'll move on to learn about the concept of infrastructure as code, which is a very basic building block of cloud computing. We'll apply that concept to SIEM. So we'll talk about SIEM content as code. We'll also discuss what SIEM content is. And then we'll go into Sentinel Repositories, which is the Sentinel feature that implement all that together and learn how to use it to implement SIEM content as code. Lastly, we'll talk about a new release we did supporting Bicep templates in our repositories and understand why that's important. I do have a pretty large number of demos in the presentation. I was smart enough not to try to do them live, so I pre-recorded just last night, so they are fresh, and I do hope it would be useful to you. So let's start a cloud-native SIEM and now also XDR. What is it about? Why is it important? When we launched the Microsoft Sentinel more than six years ago, as I mentioned, I had to go and learn what cloud is. And what I learned is what's so important about running your SIEM as a cloud service. Obviously, there's infinite scale. I still remember the days where we had every Black Friday to do discussions with our customers around will we scale? Can we handle the traffic? It's never a problem with a cloud SIEM. Sentinel just takes it in as much as you'd want. It's based on the cloud data lake that can get as much information as you need, no limits, no disks, etc. That's sort of taken for granted, but it doesn't stop there. Being a cloud service allows for very easy serverless integration. Sentinel is an AI-based service, API-based service. So everything you can do is the unified in the user experience, you can also do using APIs, which is great for advanced customers, for MSSPs, as well as for any integration you'd like, such as when partners want to create integration with their products. And lastly, through those APIs, as well as DevOps processes, Sentinel works very well for continuous integration and deployment, which is the main topic of this session today. All that makes running your SIEM in the cloud a lot more powerful than trying to install servers anywhere. Now, I do want to mention that I'm talking about Sentinel today, but we have recently introduced our Unified Security Operations Platform, which combines Microsoft Sentinel with Microsoft XDR and all the Defender suite. It's a single portal today that enables you to do all together. So you have your Sentinel, but it works as part. It has a lot of advantages. Customers love it. You now have a unified incident queue. You can hunt across the XDR and SIEM data. You have correlation automatically done between the platforms. But in addition to all those, we also bring the concept of SIEM that we'll discuss today, the cloud native SIEM, the integration capabilities, DevOps, CI/CD, content as code into the XDR world. So whatever I'm talking about today, and the examples are very Sentinel specific yet, is also relevant for our broader unified security operation platform. So let's talk about the issue at hand. What is infrastructure and code as code? I will start with describing infrastructure as code generally, without specific relation to SIEM. I think it's important to start with. Infrastructure as code is a way to manage and provision your IT systems using code instead of, well, manual processes, as in buying systems and installing them. Obviously, infrastructure as code is a partner to cloud computing in general, because in cloud computing, your resources are all virtual. There's no real computer. There's a VM or a container that you deploy. On top of that, you can use way more than just VMs and containers. You can use PaaS, platform as a service, services such as managed databases, event queues, etc., or storage services. Defining all those using a code, so a program to describe hardware, is a perfect way to be consistent in how you document things, but is also a way to combine software and hardware or services into a system. Now, infrastructure is also part of your software. It's also an enabler for combining development and operations by continuously integrating and deploying your systems, including software and hardware, when you need to change. That's all very philosophical. How does it really look like? So code is code. I will not get into the details here. The example for on the right is a Bicep template that describes a storage account. So a piece of cloud resource that you will want to deploy. Bicep is the upcoming modern way in Azure to describe infrastructure as code. Historically, most of Azure resources were described, and infrastructure as code in Azure is based on Azure ARM templates. You may also have encountered Terraform, which is a third-party method for describing infrastructure as code, which is used also in Azure, but also in other cloud platforms. Okay, so you have a piece of descriptive text describing infrastructure. In this case, a storage account. How do you actually use it? So the way you use it is you deploy it. Azure has a feature to deploy templates, which you can see here on the right. We'll demonstrate it in a second. But you can also do it programmatically through Azure CLI or through PowerShell. And we'll see, and we'll use a lot in this presentation, through GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions allow you to use the template as part of your CI/CD workflow. Let's move into our first demo and see how you can deploy a custom template using the Azure portal. So as you can see, you go into the portal and you hit custom deploy, and then I'm not moving to the next slide. Apologies for that. I have to move manually. You look for your template and you select the template. And let me pause for a second. You get a template deployment form. The actual parameters in this deployment form are based on what is in the template, in the code describing your infrastructure, and they can change. And you fill those in. Behind the scenes, you can edit the template and you can look into what's really inside there. That said, it's not very easy to really understand the text, so there's a way to visualize the actual template. I'm not an infrastructure expert. This template is specifically around deploying a web application firewall. so a piece of real infrastructure, and it involves a lot of things such as IP addresses and virtual networks, and all that was incorporated in the template, in the infrastructure as code. Now, all that is obviously something that for most of you is less interesting. That's cloud infrastructure, Azure. It can also apply to Sentinel. Our next demo would be deploying to Azure button the Sentinel itself. I did notice that my recordings are a bit too fast for me. I might stop a bit in the middle to make sure that I can voice over and explain. So here you can see the Microsoft Sentinel only in one solution. It's available on our GitHub, and it enables deploying all of Sentinel, including connectors and analytic rules and workbooks immediately as a demonstration or testing environment, or even if you want to really start a small system. If you go down, you'll actually see that there is a deploy to Azure button that opens exactly the same custom deployment that you've seen before. So we are using behind the scene a very similar infrastructure as code concept to deploy Sentinel artifacts. You can see that you can configure here in the wizard itself based on the template a lot of selections around that. All of them are tied in within the template, so they're part of the infrastructure as code. And if you want to go in, we can actually look into what the template looks like. And we see that it's a piece of code that describes a Sentinel deployment. And we can also go and visualize it. In this case, the visualization is not as good. There's a reason for that. We'll go into it when we discuss ARM templates versus Bicep templates later on. This ARM template is very complicated, and the visualization capability does not do it justice. So we've seen that you can represent infrastructure as code. We've seen an example of a Barracuda web application firewall that you can deploy on Azure with all the environment in a single program or infrastructure as code text. And we also saw that you can actually deploy a whole Sentinel instance using a template, and it's already actually available to you. There's more to that. You can use infrastructure as code for a full continuous integration and deployment lifecycle, and we'll talk about it a bit here. I'll talk in general because that's a general use case. I'll be more specific and provide examples that will make it more tangible later on when I talk about using the same process for deploying Sentinel content, which is more important to us. So first of all, you can have a development environment because you can deploy your infrastructure as code templates to a separate environment that's just for one developer. You can then, because it's textual, have tools to validate your plan, whatever the plan is. You can also use tools to build, to integrate modules into your code, your infrastructure as code. And it's much easier to automatically test once you have a description of your system using code. Moreover, unlike somebody manually going and installing pieces of hardware or services or software, when it's all described as code and deployed using automation tools, you can have release gating. Somebody can approve that, somebody can review, you can release only on change windows. And obviously, you can deploy to many environments, so you can easily replicate the same system across different implementations. We see a lot of use for that in service providers environment. And obviously, you can continuously update. If there is a change, it doesn't mean starting from scratch. You can just change your configuration and recreate the system. All that is the general concept of infrastructure as code. We saw how you can deploy it, how you can use it even for Sentinel, and how it can benefit in continuous integration deployment, i.e. CI/CD. Let's talk about the application of that for SIEM. To start with, let's talk about what is SIEM content. It's a term used very commonly in the SIEM world, but the word content is so generic that it's probably worth revisiting what it means in the SIEM world. So content are no-code artifacts or less code artifacts that are used by SIEM users, mostly you out there, also by service providers to adapt the SIEM and also XDR to the environment. It might be to the specific IT systems, it might be to the threat landscape, and most importantly, to the specific processes and procedures in the organization. It's also used by partners, by uh, other vendors to provide integration of their products to our SIEM and XDR. So a software vendor or security vendor may create a solution that includes a connector as well as supporting artifacts to bring the value of their product within the SIEM. What is it actually about? So content includes connectors, detection rules, workbooks, which are the dashboards or visualization elements in Sentinel, playbooks, which provide automation capabilities, and more. All those are typically packaged in the solution, and in Sentinel today are available in the Content Hub, which is what you see on the right. Customers, after selecting or self-developing content, typically want to manage the content, and today we'll see how to manage it as code. Let's start with a short demo, jumping straight in. We'll see how any analytic rule in Sentinel is actually content as code. It has a text representation that you can actually use in the same manner I used templates before. So we'll start with a rule. You see it here. It's available in the manager. That was too fast for me. It's available in the manager tenant, but it's not available in the other tenant. So we'll go and export the analytic rule and get it in a textual form. So just to repeat that, I feel it was too fast. We have it in one tenant. We don't have it in another actually workspace. We'll go and in the first tenant export and get a textual representation of our analytic rule. You can see the name, failed logon attempts in off preview. You can see the severity as well as all the information needed in order to actually deploy it. Now, let's go to how to deploy it. Same interface, same thing. We'll copy the template to the custom template deployment in Azure. No relation to our workspace. We'll select the resource group and type in the workspace name we want the template to appear on. We'll go and create it. That's general method to deploy templates in Azure. We'll wait a second. We'll see that actually happens. And then if we go back to the workspace and refresh, we see that the new rule, the top one, appears here. So we were able to export into a file our analytic rule. We can then keep it, manage it, store it, print it, review it, and then we go to the Azure standard tools for infrastructure as code, i.e. deploying custom template and deploy the template. Let's also see how we can use the same procedure to update the template. It's not just to create it in the first time. Oh, sorry for that. That was, again, the same demo. Apologies for that. Let's move to the next one. Now I'll go and I change the severity to high. I'll go to deploy the custom detections using the same method, again, copying the new template with the high word, selecting the same workspace, repeating the process. And once I create it and wait a second to see it being created again, I'll go back to the workspace, refresh, and see that the actual severity change here from medium to high. So I don't just use templates to create rules or bring rules into the environment, I can, on an ongoing basis, update the text, redeploy, and see the changes in my environment. We'll see how that's very helpful with repositories in a few minutes. Now that we've learned what infrastructure as code is and what content as code is, let's move on and discuss CI/CD and repositories, the actual feature that uses all this goodness in an easier to use manner. Because I do need to acknowledge what I presented so far, and I did repeat a few demos twice because of that, was, well, advanced. Repositories try to make it easier. So what are repositories? Repositories let you connect a GitHub or ADO repository. Sorry for the dual use of the word, the ADO or GitHub repository, as well as the feature in Sentinel using them, to your workspace. What it actually does, it on an ongoing basis synchronize the files in your GitHub or ADO repository to your workspace. It will fetch, and we'll see how in a second, templates such as the one we saw just in the previous demo, stored in your code management repository into your workspace. That's very important in order to facilitate continuous integration deployment in Sentinel. It helps to create separate dev, test, and stage environments, as well as a pipeline that enables checkpoints on moving between development, testing, and staging and production. And it also enables distribution to multiple environments, the end result. To understand that one better, we probably need to reflect a bit on what GitHub or ADO repositories are about. Some of you know them well. For some of you, it might be a new concept. I'm talking about GitHub. That's my comfort zone. We provide similar support for ADO. Everything I'll talk about here works for ADO as well. So GitHub is a whole world to itself. I'll share a bit. We use some of it in repositories. We don't use everything. The process in GitHub or ADO that we'll take advantage of is this one. In a GitHub repository, you maintain a main branch, which is the best production level code that you have. Since we translated Sentinel content into code, it will be the best production level version of your content, detection rules, workbooks, playbooks, etc. If you want to develop, you create a branch. A branch is a copy of your data, which includes everything, and a developer is able to change, modify without affecting the main branch. A developer would write. When I'll do the example later on, you'll see I do it within the GitHub user interface. Typically, the developer will develop in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, and then we'll commit to change and update the branch. So only the branch will change, a version of the original, while the main branch, the production level one, will not change. When the developer thinks that the branch is in a good enough shape, he or she will create a pull request. A pull request is a request to merge the changes back to main. A pull request needs to be validated and approved. Validation is often done automatically using a concept called workflows, which enables running scripts on the new branch to check that it's all fine. Usually, the checks will be just on whatever changed. And then there's approval. Approval can be automatic, but typically requires a review, a person to actually look into things. Once a change is approved, it can be merged, and it's merged back into the new main. This is a very simplified version. If you go and look for, GitHub diagrams on, you'll see a way more complicated depiction of the process with multiple branches, with branch merging into a another branch. There's actually good use cases for that, but I wanted to keep it simple. What we are doing is we are connecting main or a branch to a workspace. So when main changes, your workspace will change. We also have an option that if branch changes, a workspace is updated. That's very good. If you have a development or testing workspace, you want to update on an ongoing basis before you actually had a thumbs up for approval for a new main. We'll start with a demo that shows how to connect your repository. So actually the feature in Sentinel that used to connect a workspace to a repository. It starts by adding a new repository, typing the name. You need to authenticate to GitHub. I'm already authenticated. You need to select a repository. I didn't go through everything here because I was already connected. And then you can select it from a list. And then you can choose a branch. Choosing a branch is actually important. As I mentioned, you can connect the main branch or a different branch to your workspace. And then, as you may have seen, you can select the content types that you want to sync into the workspace. You can have a repository that has just analytic rules, or you can have additional content types that you want to connect. Now that we've connected a Sentinel workspace to a repository, you want to see how you can use it to actually update a detection. I'm using a workspace that was already connected and already synced with a repository. So you'll see that there is a detection that's already there. In the demo, this one, squid proxy events, and it's in a high priority. We'll go to the repository which is connected. We'll go to it. We'll see the file as it is on the repository. We'll edit the file and change the severity from high to low and commit the changes. So essentially merge it to main back. Typically, it's a longer process. We've done it fast here. In this commit stage and getting back to main, that's typically where a lot of your smartness will be. Now, it takes a bit of time, but we'll get back to the second part. You can see in the actions part in GitHub that the action was run to update. And if we go back and refresh our analytic rules, we see that we changed the severity of the rule to low. So to get back to what we did, we've connected a repository to Sentinel. We have put a analytic rule in the repository. I've done it before the demo, and it is synchronized with the workspace. Then we could go to the repository, edit the text file described in the analytic rule, change the severity in this case. And once we did it, we were able to see the change automatically implemented in the workspace. Now, let's talk a bit about the full picture. We've seen the tool set, and let's learn how this actually is reflected in the actual real-world use. So to start with, you can develop on test data. So a typical developer would create a branch and will develop on the branch. And unlike in the example I did where I merged a single change directly to the main version, this branch can be synchronized with a development workspace, enabling the developer to ongoingly test as in part of development the content just created. It might be a detection rule. It might be a playbook or workbook. So you develop, you change the text, or you develop in the workspace and copy the text back, export it all the time, because for workbooks and playbooks, the actual designer in Azure is very useful. And I would expect this workspace to have test data. Then, when there is a pull request, you can run automation on your new version. And automation can do validations. It can also do a build process, so it incorporates some common models into the developed element. Even add a banner to a workbook or add an exception handling part to a query in analytic rule. In number one here, developing on a test data, that's direct use of repositories, just connect a branch to a workspace. This second one is already a customization capability because it means that you go back to your ADO or GitHub repository and you implement additional workflows in addition to those that we have provided. Typically, the next step would be to connect another branch, the one you merge into a staging environment, another workspace that's is separate but works against real data. The advantage of that is that you do get to see if the feature works as expected, but you don't generate, in the case of analytic rules, incidents that would bother the analysts. Testing is done, everything is okay. There'll be a release process. So that's going back to what's already available in GitHub or ADO. Somebody will have to review and approve. You can make sure that the release is not whenever, but is limited to a time window in which changes are allowed. Lastly, obviously, you can connect a large number, you can connect a single repository to a large number of workspaces. So you can deploy to more than one environment, and that enables replicating your development across multiple environments. That's very useful, for example, for service providers that are managing a large number of customers. Obviously, there might be differences between those workspaces, and we have a feature we shall not go into in detail in our repositories that you can create a configuration file with parameters specific to each workspace so that the actual content deployed to each workspace is somewhat different. Because we describe our content as code, as a text file, implementing parameters within it that change between workspaces is rather simple. And lastly, of course, the whole circle can start again. If there's any change in either in any phase of the process, getting it in, retesting automatically, approving the change, and then redeploying is a matter of a few keystrokes plus getting the approver time, rather than getting back to basics. How will you get started with that? That was, I guess, sounds very theoretical. So I did show you the demonstrations where you create a connection, etc. Let's look a bit in more formal way on how to do that. So you need to start with exporting your content from a workspace. It's typically the easiest way to do it. Earlier on, around 20 minutes ago, I presented how to export an analytic rule. Some of our features have an export mechanisms. For others, you'll need a bit more instructions or a tool. In the resources page at the end of this presentation, you'll find links to how to get there. You may also want to get your initial content from the YAML templates that we provide in our GitHub, so the out-of-the-box content that Sentinel includes. Just to make sure that we are clear about the difference, we use the word templates for many things. Until now, I used templates to describe Bicep or ARM templates, which are used to in content as code to create rules or other content elements. We have another type of templates which are prior. We typically call them YAML templates. They have a somewhat different structure, and they are used as part of our solutions. So if you go to Content Hub, you'll deploy those templates to the template galleries. They are a reasonably good way to start your repository. And again, in the links in the resource page, you will find a resource that includes tools to convert those YAML templates to the ARM or Bicep templates that you'll need for repositories. Then you just copy the files into the repository. There's nothing about it. Actually, in GitHub, there's a drag and drop feature. You can be more structured and put them in a folder on your machine and connect your folder, typically using GitHub Desktop or Visual Studio Code, to GitHub. Typically, a development environment is where you work locally, you update files, and then, as mentioned earlier, commit and push the changes to GitHub on the cloud. And once the files are there, you connect your repository to your workspaces we've seen, and you probably do it to multiple ones. So you take the same repository and connect a one branch to your test environment, one branch to your staging environment, and the main branch to multiple production environments. Now, there are many ways to customize this process. What I described until now is really easy. There is a leap of faith there that you're moving to text and to configuration, but if you spend a couple of hours learning that, you can start using repositories very easily. But you can go further, and that's more effort, but I do want to mention it here. You can, when behind the scenes, when the repositories feature deploys workflows to GitHub or pipelines to ADO. So we actually go there and deploy the automation needed to GitHub and ADO that creates the sync. We also monitor that from the Sentinel UI to let you know if sync worked, didn't work, etc. You can go in and modify all the scripts that we deploy to do many different changes. You'll need GitHub documentation, though in this repository documentation, we mention a few use cases that you can do by modifying the files. For example, you can decide that we typically do use smart deployment, so we detect change and only files that were changed are redeployed. Might be a safer method. You may want full deployment because your processes call for that you can do. We deploy on any change, so the workflow detects that the file was changed and will deploy it. You can change the trigger for deployment that it's done, every night because you don't want to update during work hours. We will take any file in the repository that changes. We'll detect if it's actually a file that's that is a content item. If you want to limit the connection to a specific folder because you manage other things on the same repository, you can do that. And as mentioned, we have a feature where you can have a workspace specific parameter file for each workspace, and then enables you to include parameters in your templates that would create a difference between the different workspaces. Say the email you want to send an alert to in an automation. All that is using the existing scripts and doing changes. Most of them are documented. You can also, and that's importantly, you can enhance your GitHub experience and do a lot in the GitHub side to just do more. For example, validation is not something that we do out of the box. Okay, if you do the wrong rule, it will not be deployed, and you'll get an error, but not more than that. You can add, as typically done in the world of CI/CD, a validation flow that will check that the content is okay, generally speaking, as well as in your environment, that it follows the rules you have around creating content. The last topic we'll talk about is a bit deeper. It's about Bicep. Content as code implies that just like there are so many programming languages, there are a few options as to how to code your content or infrastructure. In the Azure world, we have two. Typically, in The past, it was all ARM templates, with Terraform being a third-party option. But ARM templates were more intrinsic to Azure. In the last couple of years, we introduced across Azure, it's not just a Sentinel thing, an option called Bicep. They're equivalent. At the end of the day, you can do everything you can do with Bicep in ARM as well. But you can already see when we look at the snippets here that Bicep is, well, simpler. Bicep is YAML, which is more readable. ARM is JSON. Also, Bicep is purpose-built, so it has a lot of features in the descriptive language which are tailored um, for infrastructure or content as code, while ARM are just standard JSON. So there are things you need to do in ARM which are just, JSON necessities. There's a long list of differences. I'm not sure I'll go here into each one of those. It tends to be, if you don't know ARM, I don't want you to learn it just to know why it's limited, but it's complex. I'll share one here. In ARM, in order to do any string manipulation, I mentioned you can have parameters and you can calculate values in the template out of parameters. It is a programming language. You need to use something called JSON string manipulation, which is very cumbersome. In Bicep, it's regular strings as you expect in any descriptive language. So it's a language built more for the use case. Beyond everything there, beyond having a Visual Studio Code support for actually writing nicely Bicep templates, Bicep is the future of Azure infrastructure as code and therefore content as code. And this is why we introduced support for Bicep in addition to ARM, and now you can put both Bicep files and ARM files in your repositories, and regardless, they'll be synced into your workspace and create necessary content items. Now, most of the demos here were in ARM templates that are easier for me. Also, we still have a lot of features that export in ARM. So it was an easier starting point. That said, translating from ARM to Bicep is very easy. And my last demo today would be around how to do that. So you need to have the Bicep extensions. Here's an ARM file. You just hit the translate to Bicep button in Visual Studio Code, and here's Bicep. So that was very simple, just to show that once you install the Bicep extension in Visual Studio Code, converting is, well, nothing. So I do urge you to move to Bicep if you're using ARM. If you're starting, please start with Bicep. It's the future of content as code. So just to summarize, here are additional resources that will be available with the presentation when you receive it later. What we discussed today is how in the cloud world, which is sort of the strength of Sentinel and Microsoft XDR in general, describing infrastructure, your system as code, is a winning prospect. It enables you to have a much more professional automated testing, development, review process, deployment, repeatability, all those goodies. It's a professional way to manage your content or infrastructure. We've seen that the repository feature in Sentinel enables you to easily jumpstart your journey into content as a code by enabling you to connect workspaces into a GitHub or ADO repository and start to manage your content as code in your GitHub or ADO repository and automatically seeing changes as they happen to the workspaces. We've seen that you can utilize that to have a full CI/CD workflow where developers use a branch and a separate workspace. Testing is done automatically on a second workspace, and then once approved and when the time is right, the content is deployed to any number of production workspaces. We are continuing to evolve repositories. We would love to hear your feedback and learn more about what you want and how you are using repositories and what we need to help you with to make your life better around that. Thank you for that. I think that it's time for questions.
Great. Thank you, Ofer. We have quite a few in the queue. So we will start with, how does Sentinel impact the unified SOC? It seems like that is moving away from Sentinel.
So that's very much not a repositories questions, but it is an important one. So the unified SOC is a way to make sure that you have a unified experience for all our security products. And just as the unified SOC did not mean that Defender for Endpoint is not there anymore, just that you work and use it as part of the suite, the same is true for Sentinel. Sentinel is there, and it's an important family member in the unified SOC. I do need to say that the repository feature is a great example of that. It's very much a Sentinel or SIEM feature that continues to live and breathe within the unified SOC. It's also, in a way, the advantage that incorporating Sentinel brings in. As a bit of a future-looking statement, without dates because it's a public forum, we are going to include other SOC content concepts, not from Sentinel, into repositories and into solutions so they can be managed professionally as well. A good example would be the unified SOC custom detections or MDE settings.
Great, thank you. Another is, what isolation/location is recommended for storing the SIEM repository within the customer's infrastructure?
Oh, a good one. Specifically for GitHub, it's slightly different for ADO. It can be anywhere. There's actually the advantage that there is no relation between the workspace tenant and the GitHub repository. So all options are open. I would not, the way repositories work, it's the data is synced. So the data is available both in the workspace and in the repository. So as things are, I don't think it matters much. I think access control, who can change, is what's more important. But the actual visibility is less critical. It is an interesting discussion if there is a need for that, which would require either upgrading the repositories feature or using capabilities in GitHub or ADO outside of repositories to enhance and resolve this specific challenge. I would love to hear more about it.
Great, thanks. Another, is there a good way to restrict global administrators from accessing your content within Sentinel? Monitoring critical roles like this when they can see the detection logic and incidents quickly becomes a problem.
So there's a challenge with the term global admin. There are global admins. At some level, somebody will be able to see things. There is one way to do it. Well, I'll mention what it is. It's typically used by service providers that do not want their customers to have access to the secret sauce, and that's using cross workspace queries. So having your content on a workspace where the person in question is not a global admin, and running the query against the workspace where the data is and the global admin is there. So separating the content from the data is the way to do that. It works well for some use cases. For many of those, I can see some use cases that would not be enough.
Okay, thank you. If we were to move from deploying detections in Sentinel to DAC, do we need to delete all detections before deploying content from a repo?
I need to say I'm not sure what DAC is. I apologize for that. I would say that, but I do have an answer to the extent I understand the question. You don't, so repos work alongside with working through the UX or the API directly. It will sync only the content that's available in the repo and will not touch anything else. So the capability to use a repo alongside other ways to manage content is there. It has process challenges. I mean, it's error prone, so it's something to consider. For example, somebody goes in the user experience and changes a rule that is managed by the repo, it will be overridden. So the answer is yes, it's possible. Need to be carefully used.
Okay. Does the Sentinel template have an option to choose deploying only free services, example for a POC?
So I think this question is going back to the Sentinel as to the example of Sentinel one I presented earlier as an example of a template. I believe the answer is yes. I didn't revisit this template for a while, but there are many choices there, and I pretty believe it's a good starting point for a free POC. Yes. I also want to remind everyone that there is anyways, for any new workspace, 30 days of free use with a cap. So alongside that, you can probably even stream some paid data in and still get a POC for free.
Okay, thank you. Will the unified SecOps platform be deployable with Infra as code?
The wheel question, the wheel word there is crucial. I didn't look into that. I mostly was talking about content code, and the example I found out is interesting around Sentinel single button deployment was sort of a nice example. We'll need to look into that. It's obviously a worthwhile goal. I didn't look into whether it's easy or possible.
Okay, thank you. Once you go CI/CD with content, how do you lock people out from using the Sentinel built-in tools to create analytics rules or other content?
It's a good question. It goes back to dual use of the user experience and CI/CD. It's all about permissions. I think all of our features, I maybe have a difference between a developer, creator, and a viewer. So for analytic rules, you can rather easily prevent your typical users from changing rules. I think that's true for most content items. So using permissions, you can achieve that. If there are gaps, if I missed something there, happy to discuss and add to our roadmap how to add the missing permission.
Great. If Bicep should be the way, what is the reason behind Azure Sentinel Repo still having everything in YAML?
So I do want to mention the distinction there. The YAML files we have in our primary repo are neither Bicep nor ARM. They're pretty good. They're good for what they do. They have information in them which is not used later on in day-to-day management. They're used for solutions building, and that requires a bit more. And they were always better than ARM templates when only ARM was there. I think that we'll keep using the YAML based content for a while on our solution building experience in GitHub. It's something we need to look into whether Bicep makes the grade, and we can switch to it. That said, the YAML is pretty nice, unlike ARM templates, which are something to get rid of.
Okay, and we have just a few moments left, so I'll just read a few more. When exporting and importing DAC and declaring entities, do the entities automatically map under entity mapping within the Sentinel UI?
Now I know what DSCs are. Okay. Yes, they do map. So the content as code description using ARM or Bicep does include entity mapping as well.
Okay. Are techniques supported with ARM deployment? I can see that they are missing while using repositories.
I would have thought they are supported. They should be supported. If I've missed something, we'll have to look back at it. I do want to mention here again, they might not be supported on the YAML templates in the public repository used for solutions. This is separate. That's very good last comment. That's not related to the use of GitHub for repositories for ongoing CI/CD. The templates, Bicep or ARM, that we use in CI/CD repositories will have things which are not available in the solution YAML templates that were mentioned a couple of times. And I do think they do include sub techniques, but we'll look into that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ofer. It looks like that's all we have time for today. We have plenty of questions that remain, so apologies to everyone that we couldn't get to, but thank you for your questions that came in. Thank you, Ofer, for being our guest and for sharing such great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team behind the scenes who helped us with answering questions and providing resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desires to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/securitycommunity. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product-related questions, please raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Microsoft Sentinel Community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.